episode 454 of Retro Encounter, RPG fans' bi-weekly podcast of many topics. I'm getting there. I'll get used to saying bi-weekly. And I'm your host, Zach Wilkerson, and we are here today to talk about Tales of Grace's F, a game that just received a recent remaster, and one of the, now it's like the fifth or sixth Tales of game that we've done on the podcast in some capacity or another. Maybe it's the fourth. I can't remember. But there is someone here I'm guessing will remember. So speaking of that, let me introduce the panel, starting with you, Wes Iliff.
Hi, everybody.
And making his Retro Encounter debut, Paul Skevington.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm great. Glad to have you. Thanks for coming along. And making his illustrious return to Retro Encounter, Mike Sollosi.
Hey everybody, it turns out I'm about as good at retiring as Brett Favre is, so yeah, I'm back maybe a little bit earlier than I initially thought I would be, but I was signed up for this game even before we knew it was going to get a remaster, and I'm excited to finally play it and talk about it.
Yeah, and I'm excited that you're here. It's a game that I'd always wanted to play, and then once I saw that it was getting the remaster, I was like, "Look, I'm just making a call." And so we picked Tales of Grace's F.
And I'm casting back my memory here. No search engine in front of me. I think this is the fourth time we've done a game journal on a Tales game.
Yeah, we did Abyss, we did Vesperia, we did Xillia.
Now this one. That's it.
I know this one. Yeah. Okay.
We also did I think we did a favorite Tales of game episode and a Tales of draft.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about this one. Tales of Grace's F has a reputation for, I think a lot of people think that it has the strongest combat system in the series, and we'll kind of get into what we think of that. But before we dig into Tales of Grace's F specifically, I want to kind of take a step back and just kind of give the panelists an opportunity to talk about our history with the series, just so listeners know where we're coming from. And I know there is at least one person on this podcast who I know is a big fan because they wrote a whole feature about Tales of. So we'll start with you, Wes. What's your history with the Tales series?
So yeah, I've kind of been into the Tales series about as long as it's been around in America, but I really connected to it with Tales of Destiny 2 / Tales of Eternia. If they ever remaster it, I'm sure they'll give it its original name back, like they did in Europe. It really always appealed to me because it was this like fighting game combat and an RPG wrapper. But when it really connected was playing co-op Tales of Eternia with my friend. Basically just no-lifing it over the course of a weekend where my furnace broke, and we basically just all wrapped up in giant comforters to try to finish the game co-op.
That is a delightful story.
It was an absolute blast.
So
ever since then, Tales has mostly been a co-op experience for me. It's slightly less of one now until my son gets a little bit older, but I have so much like residual nostalgia and love for this series that I can't leave it alone.
Yeah, and you're coming at it from a very different angle from me, and I'll go ahead and sort of talk about my experience with it, since I'm guessing the person who's played the fewest Tales of games.
I
Okay, well, fair enough. So I hadn't played a Tales of game until actually I started with the site. Well, that's not true. I played Fantasia long time ago during my AP European history class. I would just emulate it while my teacher was lecturing, and I played through all of it that way. So I don't remember it super well because it's a pretty long game, and the fact that I was able to play through that and a bunch of other games during that class. But anyway, so I played through that, but I hadn't played anything, any of the modern ones until the Vesperia remaster came out. And I got like 10 hours into that and I liked it, but TP management, which is something we'll talk about, is not my favorite part of a Tales combat system. So from there, the next one I played was Berseria, which I actually liked a lot. I think the story of that one was really strong. And then I played Arise, where I thought the combat was great, but the story just fell on its face so hard in the last 10 hours. And then the DLC, even harder, just terrible. If you haven't played the DLC, avoid. And then I played Xillia for the podcast, which is fun. So yeah, this is my fourth or fifth Tales of game. So I'm not a total noob to Tales games, but I enjoy them. But I'm not the expert that Wes is, of course. And speaking of apparently not being an expert, Paul, what's your history with the series?
Yes, my speciality, not being an expert. Yeah, yeah, it's not extensive. Essentially, I played Tales of Zestiria, and controversially liked like quite a few elements of it, but I
Okay.
got all the way up to the Water Palace, magic portals and things like that, which really always is something that I am not keen on, and it just ended there, just dropped it. And that's pretty much almost as far as I go. I did for a long time sort of follow the development of Tales of Arise, waiting for it to release. But then just didn't. Once it actually did, and did get a really positive reception, I still just didn't find the time to get around to it. So the reason I played Tales of Grace this time, obviously for sight, but the reason I really wanted to was to find a kind of entryway, and I talked a little about this on random, but find an entryway into the series, and which would allow me to give a viewpoint as someone who doesn't have that much experience with it, which I think is kind of, it's valuable in a way. Obviously, you want to hear from your experts who know everything about it, but also it's nice to see I think it might be nice to see the viewpoint of somebody who,
For sure.
who hasn't been there all that way. So yeah, that's me, pretty limited.
No, that's good. I mean, it's I like having a spectrum here, and I think Sollosi probably falls closest to me or Wes, so we'll see. But Sollosi, what's your history with the series?
Right. I think I got into it around the same time you did. In the early 2000s, I played that sort of infamous translation of Tales of Fantasia right when I was getting into emulating every Super Nintendo game I could. And I really really liked it. It's one of my favorites to this day. And that was also where I sort of first heard about the series, so I went back and found copies of Tales of Destiny and Tales of Destiny 2, which is Tales of Eternia, but I don't think they're ever going to switch back that name because Mattel holds the trademark for the name Eternia in North America because it's where the He-Man universe takes place in. Um, but I went and played several of them over the years. Not all of them, but I have gotten a little weird with the series. I did play a fan translation of Tales of Innocence, and also the PSP version of Tales of Fantasia. I tried to patch using swap magic Tales of Destiny 2 for the PS2, but did not get very far in doing that, unfortunately. But I've played, at least to a degree, most of the series, and actually finished, I don't want to make a full list, but probably 8 or 9 of them. But Tales of Graces did skip me a little bit because I bought it when it came out in the early 2010s for the PS3. Uh, and I played the very beginning. I think I played most of the childhood arc, but didn't even get to the end of that. But then I don't know, something else came up, and I eventually shelved it permanently. Kept meaning to go back to it, never did. Then this remaster comes out, and I'm living with my girlfriend now, and I said, "Oh, perfect! We both like Tales games, and we can play this one co-op together." And for me, usually playing a Tales game is a solo experience. A couple of them I did play in co-op with friends, including the first time I played Symphonia. But yeah, so I've been playing Tales of Grace's F for the past several weeks with my partner in co-op, and it's been great.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of Grace's F for me, I'm also playing it in co-op with my partner, and we'll talk about how much better at the game she is than me. But she's a Tales of expert. She's pretty much played them all. Not all of them, some of them weren't localized, but she's very good at Tales of games. And I'm very not good. But we'll talk about that during the episode. So
I'm just
Tales,
saying, if she hasn't played Tales of Destiny 2 or Tales of Innocence, she can probably still skip those. I don't.
okay.
Neither of
Yeah,
them are a favorite
I'm
for
not
me.
sure if Alana's played those or not. I guess I'll ask her. But yeah, so Tales of Graces is interesting. Sort of a little bit of history about it. So originally, Tales of Graces, and please correct me if my dates are wrong here, but the original Tales of Graces releases for the Wii in 2008, I think, and it's Japan only. It never gets localized here. And then in 2011, they release the Tales of Grace's F version, which is, sort of a PS3 version of it. And then they add the Future Arc, which I haven't gotten there yet, obviously, but I think it's like 10 hours. It sort of takes place after the end of Grace's. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but all of us are playing the remaster. I know for a fact Paul did, but everybody else, you guys are all playing the remaster in this case?
Yes,
Yes, I am.
indeed.
Okay. Yeah. And so that's where we are with the series. And I feel like it was back in the time when like Tales of games were just like releasing one after the other. And things had, and because of that, like a lot of the Tales of games end up feeling kind of similar ish. So I feel like you could kind of miss one or two and not miss a ton. Whereas now, obviously, we are in a very different era with Tales games. Tales Arise, that come out in 2001 or 2021. Is that right? I can't remember. It was a
Sounds
while
right.
ago. Um, so we don't even have news of a new one yet. So yeah, so it falls in that space. But I think that it is sort of known for having really strong combat, but for the story not being as strong. But I will say that I do like the cast of characters here, and let's go ahead and sort of talk about the premise a little bit. It's the game starts in what's called like the childhood arc, which is 3 or 4 hours. I'm gonna be honest with you before we even start here. I thought that the story and the gameplay in this section was not very good, but you play as a person named Asbel. He's a kid. He's sort of the son of the Lord of Lant. So his name is Asbel Lant. And he, wants to be a knight, and he's very brash and wants to protect everybody. And he's annoying and over the top in a way that is even intense for even an 11-year-old. And he has a brother named Hubert, who's very quiet and shy, and they are sort of exploring when they're not supposed to be off from Lant, and they just like a girl just appears out of nowhere, and she doesn't have any memories, but obviously she's it's sort of like this magical girl looking person, and they eventually decide to name her Sophie. And that's sort of where we are at the beginning, and we can sort of talk through the arc here in general, but like sort of what were your first impressions of the game, of the characters? Who did you like this childhood arc?
I mean, I like it. I was just thinking about what you're saying about the story and the brashness of Asbel. Looking back in it, I kind of liked it. I kind of found that appealing in it, sort of anime for younger viewer kind of way. Although, and I won't go too much into it, but it's kind of betrayed by what happens a bit later on. His character doing a complete kind of 180. So I like it a little bit less in light of further events later on down the line. I think that would be my first impression anyway.
Yeah, in terms of Asbel, for me, I actually kind of like the shift in him. I think it makes it like more obvious just like how much he's gone through, because he becomes like super depressed in the teenage arc because like everything is going wrong for him. And so I think like sort of that huge change from his brash anime like character to just being sort of a downer, and depressing to talk to, I think sort of it has some power in a kind of anime kind of way. But yeah, that's just my thoughts.
I mean, I'm on the record as not loving children characters in RPGs where most of the cast is teenagers or adults. And so for this beginning arc to have sort of every character being the annoying child character was not my favorite. But I accepted that at their ages they might act this way, and that Asbel's a bit rambunctious, Hubert's a bit of a crybaby, Cheria is sickly but trying her best, and Sophie is a girl that fell out of the sky, which has happened enough times in RPGs that I wasn't surprised or shocked by it. It at least establishes the characters of those four as well as Richard, and gives us a hint at how these events inform their personalities in the teenager arc, which is after a 7-year time skip. So like I didn't mind it, but I sort of didn't mind knowing that like, oh, I'll just hack through this and then the story will actually begin once it's over. But it was, I mean, I was so uninterested in this intro when I first played this game over 10 years ago that I sort of just stopped playing. So I'm not going to defend it as a favorite part of the game, but it's valuable as sort of establishing shots.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to say it's my favorite, especially, all other characters except Sophie are definitely awkward to control because they're kids. And part of me appreciates that. I'm similarly on record not minding child characters. I like the dynamics at play here. And part of me likes the idea of these characters evolving as adults, but Asbel was definitely the one that took the biggest hit for me, and I'll talk more about it as we get deeper in. Um, but while I do understand, like, he's been through so much, he's drastically changed. It's rough because he's like a driving force here, and then you're left kind of without one for a long time once you get out of the childhood arc, because your main character is just a real buzzkill in a disco suit. Um, and it's it's harder for me to connect with that character. Maybe it's because I'm so attached to anime tropes that I can forgive the little bit of happy-go-lucky for the sake of like driving things forward. Um, Maybe it's just the fact that I'm a grumpy old man and I'm not much happier seeing a depressed teenager than I am than I am a kid for other folks. Um, but I think that there is a lot of value here. This does really set up the world in an interesting way that not a lot of other games do, and really put you front and center with these relationships. Um, it's a little bit underserved by how these relationships evolve in the absence of any communication between these characters when they pick up kind of right where they left off. For at least some of these characters down the line, some of them have definitely evolved a bit, but um, some of these connections, it's such a short period of time, story wise, that it's hard to really extrapolate that through some of the events that happen later. But at the same time, it's such a long time gameplay wise that I really wish they had hit the juice on this a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't have a problem with it in theory, and I agree with everything you guys are saying. But like, it's like 4 hours, and you like there are so many parts of this game. Like, and we'll get into this more. Like, there's so much backtracking in this game. It is like backtrack the video game, and like there's like 3 towns you go to for the first like 15 hours, but like I don't mind it in in the teenage arc because like the combat is like engaging and it's fun, and it's really good. Whereas here it's like you have like 2 arts and you can dodge, and you can like sort of learn to block. And I get they're trying to like sort of like meet it out very slowly, and that makes sense to me. But at a certain point when I'm just walking back and forth and I'm fighting like the same boars over and over again, and it's not very good combat and the storytelling is taking way too long, I lost patience with it very quickly, except for with Sophie, because Sophie's good from the beginning.
I think you're right. I think the combat is based on is maybe aiming for somebody who's a bit of a newbie to it. So it kind of worked for me. I didn't find myself getting too bored with it. And the story, um, whilst I think I mentioned before, it's not particularly revolutionary, any of the things that they're doing there. But I did find there were quite a few. There were quite a few emotive moments for me that did work, like writing the names on the tree and things like that. And similarly, for some of you, I do have a bit of a high barrier for very young child characters. For me, my specific thing is adults doing child voices, which which really, I can't stand it most of the time. But they managed to. I think they did well enough that I could ignore that, and to a certain extent get involved with the sort of the key plot beats here.
Yeah, and we haven't talked too much because Richard shows up, who it turns out is the Prince of Windor, and like you're basically told, because for the record, Asbel's dad is like the worst. Like he like never understands what he wants. He's just like constantly terrible to Asbel, and like obviously Asbel just like ignores everything he says all the time. But like he is just so unpleasant. And then Richard shows up and he's also unpleasant, but at least there's a reason for it. And then like the trainer like wants to attack you, and then eventually the trainer, I can't even remember his name now, of Richard ends up trying to assassinate him for the most ridiculous thing ever. Like after that fight, like Richard's like sitting on the edge of a cliff for like 15 seconds, like, hey, what are you doing? Stop, don't move, and then he just falls off. I'm like, what are you doing, dude? So they sort of set up Richard as like, I don't know, like I think that Richard's setup is in many ways to me like the most interesting given where he goes, because he is so close to Asbel in these early goings. But really, of all the characters in this early section, to me, like Sophie is the one who like stands out as just delightful. Like her desire always to sort of like be so earnest. I feel like a lot of times like amnesiac girls can be really like sort of annoyingly presented, but I think that she's just like really entertaining as a character.
Yeah, Sophie's better than average for your regular amnesiac because I mean, it's very mysterious how she appears out of nowhere, and you get the idea that she's not a normal person because of her mannerisms, but she really is sort of just constantly discovering the world around her and learning things. And but she very earnestly is attached to Asbel and Cheria and the gang from the beginning. But she'll do things like just mimic someone's expressions while they're talking because she's trying to figure out why they're doing those expressions. Or even in victory poses, she'll do very sort of silly, blunt things that it reminds me of like a puppy or a kitten. That's just
That's a good comparison.
that's just trying to like trying to just figure things out, but are also very sweet and attached. And yeah, like again, like the trope of amnesiac or the trope of magical girl that falls out of the sky can be sort of annoying or trite some of the time, but I think she's probably my favorite character personality wise, at least at the beginning of the game, because everyone does take a tonal shift eventually.
I think this is one of the biggest strengths of the Tale series as a whole, is it really does rely heavily on your expectations based on a lot of tropes. But they manage to either execute so well or add in just enough of a twist to make those still really likable, somewhat unique feeling characters. Because yes, Sophie is this amnesiac girl who fell from the sky kind of magical girl trope, but that little twist of her being, I like the way you put it, like a little puppy that's figuring things out. Um and the earnestness that drives her through, and the kind of mystery surrounding her, all of that adds up to a relatively unique take. And seeing her, her stay in the same place as the time line for everyone else changes, is a really interesting way of seeing, like, through the eyes of someone else, 7 years have passed. Oh my god, what's happened?
Yeah, and just to backpedal a little bit, the character who attacks him on the cliff, that's I think it's called Bryce, and I don't blame you for not remembering his name, because at the time the way it was presented, I thought that this is a long running antagonist. We're setting up some real, anger for some payback. Like, no,
When
not
he
at
gets
all.
trucked by three little kids, I mean, like, I can't imagine he
Yeah.
was. I beat him in like 30 seconds or something. Like a trophy popped for it. I was
Yeah,
like,
the
oh,
trophy
cool.
popped for dang near everyone there, I gotta imagine.
Yeah, you can tell he's a villain just because he has that like fox face, and he is a sadist just when he's training Asbel and Richard. But yeah, uh, I'm not gonna pay his character any specific respect. I mean, get out of here, Bryce.
Yeah, but everything you're saying about Sophie, though, I absolutely agree with. And I've been playing it with the English dub, so listening to Cassandra Lee Morris do that difficult job of portraying her as somebody who is, as you say, mimicking, doesn't really have much experience. At the same time, someone, um, someone you think there may be more to her, there may be more behind that, and she's having to balance that stillness and absence um, with like not coming across like a complete void. Um, and I think she does a really good job of that. And I hope and the animators who are animating the character with all, as you said, all those mannerisms too.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about the voice acting, because one of the things that is sort of struck me is I agree. I think Sophie's voice acting is really good, but like it is like very early, like 2010s, like inconsistent. Like the voice direction is like all over the place. I feel like both the child, and I'm not sure if I'm guessing it's different for the child version of Richard and the adult version of Richard. Like the adult version of Richard, I think is horrendous. Like a really, really bad voice performance. And Richard's child performance is pretty bad. I think that Cheria's is pretty weak, but I think Asbel's is okay. I think Sophie's is really good. I think Pascal's, when we get to her, she's just phenomenal from top to bottom. But yeah, it's just like really inconsistently presented. I think it's such a time capsule of when we were sort of moving from really cheesy, flat voice acting to now where it's becoming consistently excellent in most RPGs.
I was going to say it's that late 2000s thing, isn't it? So I think that's why I can forgive it a little bit more, because I'm placing it in that context. So for that time, it feels like they did a pretty good job. But yeah, absolutely, compared to what we expect nowadays, maybe a little bit rough in places.
Yeah, that was right around the time when I don't know. This might be slightly controversial with some fans. I think that dubbing in anime especially was starting to turn a bit of a corner, but it hadn't finished the turn yet. Um, so you got some of the old style of dubbing that was either very flat or very over the top, and we hadn't yet settled on this kind of midpoint that we're at now, where things are still very over the top. You know, that it's treated like animation, where the expressiveness is ratcheted up, but we hadn't yet figured out how to do that while still doing it in a way that we can kind of take it seriously. So there's definitely a bit of a mix of like people who were adapting to the new style and people who hadn't quite gotten there yet.
Yeah, I think in particular, um, adult Richard. Like my wife heard a little bit of adult Richard, and she was not initially a fan at all of that delivery.
I somehow didn't call that Richard would kind of break bad because I'm dumb. But I was because I was playing with my wife who's played it before, and I'm like, either Richard's voice actor is the worst voice actor I've ever heard, or he's just bad and he's also the villain. And I was like, okay, he's bad, but he's the villain. We'll get more into that.
I think I knew that Richard takes a turn even before I started playing the game in the early 2010s, because the promotional website for the game when they were releasing it on the PS3 was called ataleoftworichards.com or something. So I was like, oh, okay,
what?
something happens to Richard.
Yeah.
A Tale of Two Richards.
Yeah. I wish I was joking.
There are a lot of
still around.
There are a lot of jokes that could be made on that one, and I'm very concerned about most of them passing muster on this particular
Don't go there.
podcast.
I know we haven't talked about the combat yet, and I kind of want to hold that until we get to the teen arc, because I think it's pretty weak up to that. But we are close to the teen arc, luckily, even though we've talked about it now for 20 minutes. It goes on for 4 hours or something. And so sort of the last thing that happens here in the childhood arc is, you'd like, we already referenced this, you write your names. I think Cheria, Richard, and Asbel, like, we're going to be forever friends. And then Richard goes off back to Windor. And then basically immediately Asbel just says well, I'm going to go visit Richard right now because his dad leaves without him. And his dad, after being just the biggest jerk to him about it again, after he's literally saved the life of the prince, takes Hubert off. And we, sort of have some impressions as to why that's the case, but we don't know exactly why. And then when we get there, he meets up with Richard, and then he is supposed to meet Richard sort of in the castle at night, and he tells him about the secret passageway. So you and Sophie go through, and then it turns out that Richard is sort of hurt because he doesn't meet you when he was supposed to come meet you. And there's this big sort of supernatural force that's attacking, and then Sophie just goes wild and starts attacking the supernatural force, and then Asbel is knocked out before we realize what happens to her. And I actually think that for all my criticisms of the childhood arc, I think that scene is really cool. I'm a sucker for a good anime fight, and I think that's pretty cool. Just getting to see Sophie in her element, which is appropriate because she's the only one who's actually fun to control, I think, in the first 3 or 4 hours in combat. But then when you wake up, you find out that Hubert has been adopted off to another family, so he's gone, and that Sophie died. And Asbel freaks out, and he's like, no, I'm going to leave. I'm not going to be the Lord of Lant. I'm going to go become a knight. And so he goes to Windor to do that. And that's the end of the childhood arc.
It felt like a big deal, like something tremendously out of the scope of a bunch of kids was going on. And it kind of justifies the impact that it had on all of them, in a way that I think really, really works for the game. And sets up a nice core mystery as to exactly what was going on that kind of stretches throughout the rest of the game. And on a complete side note, yes, there was a teaser site called A Tale of Two Richards before they announced the game.
Yeah, I would emphasize the point you made there as well, that it does feel like that particular moment is a moment of great intensity that we haven't encountered in the almost counter to everything else that's happening in the child arc. I know we've had the betrayal of Bryce and everything, but even that one doesn't feel like it's got too much heaviness to it.
When a bunch of kids beat him up, it doesn't have a lot of fangs.
Exactly. But here we've got a lot of consequence. So yeah, it's a real turning point in the story.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's a real turning point too, because it's when we shift forward 7 years, and you're a night close to graduation playing as Asbel. You're wearing how did you put it? A disco outfit, Wes?
Yeah.
That is it's so white and so bright. I'm like, whoa.
So very
I love
Saturday
it.
Night Fever.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. And you're training with a guy named Malik, who is a teacher and an instructor who's voice actor in English. I don't know his name, but he's in like every video game. He's pretty good. He's got like a very deep voice. But I think at this point, the thing I want to kind of hone in on is the combat, because like this is when the combat really becomes what it is. So this is, if I'm not mistaken, the second Tales of game that had the CC system. Am I correct in that? Destiny, was that the first one?
I think Destiny's PS2 remake might have had a CC system.
Okay.
And did one of no, I don't think the DS games had a CC thing going on. Anyway, like um I'm not sure if this is the first game that used a CC system like this, but it's a much more refined version of any TP list system they had before.
Oh yeah, for sure. And so the reference that Sollosi was making, there are a lot of Tales of games were using like sort of a TP system for your combos. This is sort of a very combo heavy, action RPG. And with TP, you would sort of have to charge it up, and then you would sort of expend that TP, and you could refill it almost like a magic meter, but not quite. And I always found managing that to be somewhat frustrating. But here you have CC, which certainly which allows you to do combos. So you might, and you have like two different sets of combos. You have what's called A arts, which are like assault arts, which are sort of like your sort of standard combo. Go from one thing into the next, into the next, into the next, by tilting something on the left stick, at least playing it on the PS5. And then you also have a B art, which is sort of like burst arts, which you can sort of move in between them. And depending on how much CC you have, you can restore it. Like perfect dodges help you to restore CC to kind of keep things going. And you want to keep your combos moving. You also have blocking, but blocking, I think, is less of a thing here if you're playing well than it was, I think, in previous Tales of games, especially some of the TP driven ones where you're just sort of waiting for that to refill. There's also a lot of other stuff going on. You have an Iliff gauge, which basically once you fill it up, it allows you to sort of infinitely combo over and over again. You have the Iliff mixer, which is outside of combat, but it allows you to sort of have food trigger in certain ways. You can also create more items with that Iliff mixer. There's a lot going on with the system, and even further than that, there's the title system, which I don't know how many titles any given character has, but they're like 120, and you're just constantly flipping between them, where you sort of earn titles, and then in each title you can earn like up to 5 either like new arts or stat upgrades or mystic arts, or even unlocked through the titles. And you're just constantly flipping and moving and changing those titles around. And it all sounds like a lot, and to some degree it is, but I think one of the things that really impresses me about this game is the way it all feels streamlined in a way that isn't too overwhelming. I have some criticisms that I'll talk about in a second here, but for the most part, I think that they are extremely well put together. And once it opens up, like even when I'm backtracking over and over and over again, like I get in a fight, like I'm excited to do it. I'm excited to learn, to get better. And even if I get destroyed, which did happen to me, and I'll talk about that in a second, I know that like I'm going to learn and get better with it, and it's going to be smooth and it's going to be fun.
Really, I feel a lot of the gameplay systems here are sort of compressed versions of past Tales of games. And I hope I'm not repeating too much of what you've already said, Zach, but like the Iliff mixer system is kind of like cooking in old Tales games and item fusing in old Tales games, but sort of just wrapped in the same package. And titles in previous Tales games would give you stat bonuses and be sort of like a piece of equipment, and maybe teach you some passive skills. But in this time, they sort of have all learned skills wrapped into titles, and you unlock titles in the story, and by using arts a bunch of times, and by accomplishing other gameplay goals, and by side quests. Basically, titles give you every kind of bonus, but they replace spell learning and skill learning in large parts. And the way that CC replaces TP, at first, like my brain is more comfortable in a TP system, which basically it works like MP. It's like a zillion RPGs that we've all played together. But in a regular Tales of combo, it would in most games in the series, it would be a couple attacks, then you use a basic art, then an advanced art, and then if you can and then you can start chaining advanced arts together until you can maybe cast a mystic art, which is sort of like a super move. But doing that, even when you're advanced into the game, can take out a full third of your magic of your TP meter, and you regain TP slowly by regular attacks or by using healing with items, and it can be
Orange gels
miserable.
all day long.
Yeah, good lord. I mean, how many? I probably Man, I probably gave Yuri Lowell tooth decay with all the orange gels I had him chewing the entire game. But the and I mean, again, it's fun because the basic actions in a lot of Tales games are fun action oriented combat. But in this game, you basically have CC. You only have a small amount of it. I think where I am in the game right now, like Malik has maybe 15 CC. But your regular and your first couple alpha arts will build CC a little bit, but then your advanced alpha arts or your burst arts will spend it quickly. And if you finish a long combo and you're down at 0 CC, if you just pause or guard for a few seconds, it'll fill back to 15. And there's items and levels and titles that give you higher maximum CC. So basically, it's a TP system but your TP fills back to maximum in a few seconds instead of laboriously through more combos or using healing items. So it lets you use your best combos pretty much every fight without being punished by TP limitations, and you can still use your Mystic Arts, which are your super moves, when your LF gauge sort of puts you into a super state of infinite CC, and you get your first Mystic Arts in this game pretty early on. Like I think before I hit the 10-hour mark, that everyone in
Yeah.
my party had their Mystic Art, and I was starting to find like the level 2 Mystic Arts. So it really, a lot of the systems in Tales of Graces are older Tales systems, but compressed and streamlined and accelerated. And part of why people love CC is because it's a little bit button mashy friendly. Like you can just judiciously keep pressing A or B depending on what controller you're using, and be able to pull off some pretty cool stuff. And I think part of it is the limitations of this originally being a Wii game. The Wiimote, I know the Wii can, the Pro controller opens up more possibilities, but that original Wiimote really was dominated by the A and B button. So they tried to make this combat as two button as they reasonably could. Is my interpretation at least. But they just try to get you to the cool parts of Tales combat faster than in previous games where TP was a major limitation, and and as a result, it's a little bit masher friendly. But if you are if you practice and get good at the combat, you can really pull off some cool stuff, and that happens with far fewer drawbacks than in system drop down by TP. I've been talking too long, but the gist of it is a lot of Tales systems are streamlined here, and unless you're trying to collect every title, which is a hair pulling task if I've ever heard one, it's really really fun.
The fact that there are trophies associated with that is absurd to me. I feel like Tales of games are always like some of the most annoying platinums.
A few nights ago, my girlfriend and I were playing the ridiculous Hanafuda game in the desert just because she saw that there was 3 titles for beating them without the opponent scoring a point.
Pretty hard.
That's about right.
It's not as at first it seems impossible, but then you realize that each difficulty setting only has like 3 patterns that they do, and if you just memorize one pattern, you can do it.
Yeah, I find it fascinating both of you talking about the systems and the earlier systems, because it does feel like that what you want from an action RPG, action JRPG is different than you want from a turn-based one, and whether or not the journey of Tales has been this evolution from and the divergence between those two forms. And it sounds like button mashy aside that this new system is much more friendly for something that is more adrenaline fueled, fast paced. Yeah, and what you want from the word action, kind of excitement, that the old system maybe didn't cater for quite as much is what I'm getting from that anyway. So certainly what I felt with the pacing of the combat in the games.
Yeah, I'll say there's definitely like a higher skill ceiling for Tales of graces, to borrow a term, than a lot of the Tales games have, which are kind of action RPGs for turn-based RPG players. This one feels a little bit more like it's trying to give something to the more action-oriented players. Now, I'll diverge a little bit here, because this isn't my favorite Tales battle system. I think it's got a lot of really cool ideas, and I do think that basically everything Sollosi said was right. And I do 100% feel the pain of orange gel spam in most Tales games. But I kind of enjoy the action of doing those things a little bit more, because I feel like in Graces I'm so often get out a combo, guard, back up. There's a lot of like go, wait, um, which does streamline things absolutely. But it's a rhythm that is never quite the way that I like to play. Um, that said, it's a lot of fun, especially with other people, when you're working on that mastery and you're kind of like weaving in combos and like, okay, I got to back up, the other person jumps in. That can make for a really satisfying experience, because not only does the skill set scale for one person, it scales really well for a team in a way that a lot of Tales games never have. And the fact that I'm playing it single player this time has definitely affected how much I'm feeling that. Um, but as a Tales game, you can also put it on auto for most of your random encounters and just kind of let it blow through, which I've done a few times. It's honestly kind of freeing.
Yeah, I think that there's something to what you're saying there. I mean, because I think that I really like the CC system, and I think it works really well. But I do think that unless you are very, very skilled, like you find yourself just sort of waiting and guarding. I know if I perfect dodged over and over again that I would be refilling my CC, but like the tells on enemies are not that obvious, and so I can either block, which sort of kills the rhythm, or I can get good and learn to dodge. And so I find myself waiting a little bit, and I like that I like that there is that skill ceiling. And I think about, like, I don't know, when I played Tales of Berseria, which is after this, but in some ways its system is kind of similar to this. I don't think they technically call it CC, but it feels like that. But like I was using Velvet in that game, which completely breaks that game wide open, because she has one combo that just like constantly refills the CC in that game. So I was never not able to combo, but it also made the game too easy. So
It's
it's
a little
interesting.
different. It's a little different in Berseria, because if my memory serves, your CC counter sort of starts at 0, but then basic combos will build it up, and then you can spend the CC on your
That
bigger
sounds right.
moves,
Yeah,
and
that
then
sounds right.
start building up with a regular combo again. So it's a similar ebb and flow, but it has a little bit less of a hard wall to run into when you're out of CC, like in Tales of Graces. And I mean, and you also get some really weird stuff in that game, like if you mess up or if you use a really powerful move in Berseria, sometimes you can temporarily lose maximum CC to pay off a really powerful attack. But Wes was um, hinting at this earlier. Even in older Tales games, the best way to get a really good combo going is to have one character do a long combo and then sort of tag off to another character continuing the combo. And that's in co-op, it's really easy to do, because in single player it's really laborious to switch characters, and the AI won't always cooperate with you. But if two experienced players sort of get into a tag team rhythm, you combo, no I combo, that's when the meter gets really, really high, and the real fun stuff happens. And this isn't my favorite Tales of Combat either. I think it's better in Berseria, maybe also better in Arise, but the problem with Arise is just like enemy life is too high, and your combos sort of don't feel effective in the end game. Um, but what Graces does really well is, at least to me, is mage characters, because Malik and Pascal are really fun to play in this game. Malik has, you can do sort of range attacks with your boomerang as your assault arts, and then your burst arts are traditional Tales of spells, like spread and rock and well, excuse me, spread and fireball and etc. But like in older Tales of games, being a mage really was just sitting in the back and being a potted plant and then huffing orange gels to restore your CC. But Malik can do like boomerang combo attack to get your CC up and then pay it off with a big spell. I've used mage characters in this game more than I ever have before in a Tales game, I think, because the rapidly refilling CC suit makes mage gameplay a lot less boring.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a strength of the system in general. So I'm the sort of person who, when I'm playing any game, like I just kind of want to like get one character and get good at that character. But my partner's kind of flipping between. She's playing some Sophie. When you get Hubert, which when he's in your party, he has like these gun attacks and he kind of moves in and out. And I like that, like all of them feel different, but they're all, I think, satisfying in their own way. Probably, Cheria is probably the healer is probably the least engaging of them, but they all, I think, are tuned well to working with the system. And I'm the sort of person who likes to be up in someone's face all the time and just attacking. That works out well for me to play Asbel. And so I think that there's a great variety in the ways that you can play, and also the way that CC works with those different things, like chaining spells and stuff like that.
Yeah, I found myself playing in two different ways most of the time, which is if I really wanted to or was having a tough time, look at the creature, research its weaknesses, and the moves that were required to do it, making it feel more like a fighting game. But sometimes for your average end, I just couldn't be bothered, so I would just do whatever I could to get through it. But that could extend combat or end badly for you. So there was a bit of a trade-off between how much time I was willing to put in to actually figure out which combinations would be the most effective. When you did figure it out, it is very satisfying. And even playing solo, and I do to a certain extent feel like I've missed out a little bit in not doing multiplayer. I might have to revisit it at some point to do that as well. So there's a lot of incentive for like doing it right, but yeah, that was where I had a little bit of a grey area on the system as to how I felt about it. It was always really enjoyable, but yeah, the homework aspect of it was not didn't always appeal to me.
Yeah, it's a little weird. A lot of Tales of games have elemental weaknesses, like in a lot of RPGs, but this
Mm,
one has elemental affinities and weaknesses and creature type affinities and weaknesses
mm,
that aren't always logical or easily communicated.
mm.
So, like you have to sort of figure out which of your, if you're fighting an insect boss, which of my attacks are good against insects, and then maybe change your loadout a little bit. It's not. There's a lot going on, but usually I just try to use the skills that need leveling up so I can unlock more titles.
Yeah, that kind of gets to my only real beef with the systems in this game, and that is like titles. I think are particularly guilty of this. I get really tired of going in, changing titles, going in, changing titles. I feel like I do it like after like every like third fight. I'm just constantly in menus, and I think that's part of it too. Like I like the idea of the titles, but the reality is that like unless you're like purposely trying to unlock titles, you're not going to have that much adaptability in like the titles that you're choosing. You're probably going to be maxing them out
Oh,
relatively early.
very early on, went to the setting after you get to level 5 in this title, automatically switch to a new
Yeah.
one.
That's probably
Because
what I should do, but I'm trying to switch off like after I get to 3, just to, but yeah,
I didn't
I'm a
even
little
know that was
tired
a
of the
thing.
tinkering. Yeah.
yeah, the
Damn.
automatic setting for that is definitely useful, because otherwise, yeah, I'm already doing a bit of menu tinkering, and like it would triple it if I didn't have that sort of auto switching on.
Yeah, it can be a real really laborious. I love the names of the titles, and
Oh
there's
yeah, they're
definitely a sense
delightful.
of there's it's a real sense of fun with that. But yeah, I totally agree. Maybe it's not something that you need to do. If I'd known that option was there, I would have been a much happier person, I think, at the time.
Whenever I get a new title from a story sequence or from a major character driven side quest, I usually look at that one and equip that, because that more often than not that teaches you an advanced burst art or something. Because
Mm.
the ones you get from the story are the ones that sort of gate your progress a little bit. Like they don't want you casting these arts until the mid game, so this is a story. So you get this title from the story rather than from a side activity. And so for things like that, I will manually change the title, but mostly I'm just happy to keep it to an automatic setting.
Yeah, I found myself only really concentrating on it for the big boss fights, when total min maxing was required. At least for me in some of those encounters. So yeah, then I would kind of flip off some of the more boring effects although that I found more boring anyway, maybe, and try and go for like extra hit points or whatever it was required to just get through that sequence. But aside from that, it would be doing it for the reasons you've all described so far as well.
Yeah, and it's funny too because and we've been on combat for a long time here, but that's a a critical part of this game, and certainly what people talk about with this game. But as soon as you unlock those arts, like those burst arts, the very first fight that I had, I was like, oh, because I had to do it by myself, and I've already said this, my partner's carrying me here. I had to fight like this dog, and I died like 8 times. It was like, you have to learn to block more, Zach. So I think it gets to the skill ceiling stuff, but yeah. Does anybody else struggle with that dog as much as I did?
I did.
No?
Did take me a couple of times, I think. And I identify with the dodging. I don't think I ever became an absolute master at it, to the extent that whenever I do it, I get like obscenely happy with myself probably inappropriately so. More than if I was I was a much better player, I guess.
I don't remember struggling it with this one. I struggled way more with the dog in Vesperia's remaster a couple years ago. I think that was in 2018 or something. Oh man, time is no meeting. But yeah, I don't think this is the most challenging Tales of game, but I've also I mean, I'm probably grinding a lot. I just fight every enemy as we see them. My girlfriend likes to sort of explore every nook and cranny of every space, so we're probably over leveled and overtitled. But I mean, we've each sort of picked our favorite characters to use. I like how when you switch between assault and burst arts, like a lot of times the characters will change forms. Like you mentioned, how Hubert will go from attacking with sort of connected swords to then splitting them into guns for his burst arts. Asbel will fight with a sheathed sword and then an unsheathed sword for switching from assault to burst. The spellcasters sort of go from physical attacks to casting spells. I think it's it sort of has the visual changes with the combat to fit the gameplay. That's usually pretty fun. But I mean, I guess I've struggled with more Tales of games in the past, or maybe I've played too many of them.
Yeah, I didn't find it too catastrophic until later points in the game. And you mentioned the sheathing sword mechanic for Asbel. That was quite a moment where you've really got to pay attention. Obviously, if he does that, his health increases, and I found that to be a saving grace for myself at several points. And there's little parts of the mechanics like that it could be very easy to miss, and I think that's a key part of this combat system. It is very there can be tiny little finicky things that you really need to be aware of, and if you're not, you might be finding yourself in trouble.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we've probably talked enough about the combat. We can kind of talk a little bit more about the story now. But the story at this point sort of becomes like a sequence of unfortunate events for Asbel. It's just like thing after thing after thing. Where like we see him get beaten down over and over and over again, and as we talked about earlier, he becomes a real downer. But I can't really blame him based on the sequence of events that he goes through, especially because like at the end of the sequence we just talked about, Malik says, "Hey, you are now a knight. Like you have, you've sort of graduated." And then he very quickly, after that happens, Cheria, his childhood friend, who we have barely talked about, but I think there's a reason for that. I think she's the weakest character in the cast. I think her personality is mostly just like, I like Asbel. And that seems to be mostly it. And I was sick and now I'm not. Whereas I think the rest of the female cast is generally very strong. But she finds you in Windor and she says, "Hey, we were trying to get a hold of you. Your dad's dead. You need to come back to Lant. We're being invaded by Fendel, which is another kingdom." And so Asbel returns, and when he gets there, it's like Fendel is overwhelming Lant. But then Strata shows up, another kingdom, but it's also the kingdom that Hubert, who was the adopted, or who is adopted off, and was Asbel's brother, is Asbel's brother. And he comes in and Strata takes over essentially. And very quickly, Hubert says like, "No, you're not going to be the Lord of Lant, Asbel," because that was sort of his plan at that point. You're not going to do it. I am, unless you can beat me in a duel. And it's funny because I had just gotten destroyed by that dog. And then I went against Hubert and I was like, am I just really bad at this game? And I was like, no, I was supposed to lose that fight. He just obliterated me. And then Hubert is extremely mean to Asbel, so much so that he tells him, after he loses it, that he's no longer welcome. He's angry that Asbel left. He's probably upset, obviously, that he was adopted away. I think Hubert's one of my favorite characters. I really like Hubert. I think he's an interesting character. I think that he's sort of uptight, but also, kind, and also has all these sort of issues. And he changes so much from when he's a kid, just like many of these people do, including Asbel. So what were some of your thoughts on some of the early events of the teen arc, as I will call it, because they're not adults yet?
Going back to the child arc, did feel a bit sorry for Hubert in that they make him literally wet himself when he's a child. How do you ever get past that? Really, how has that not always been raised every time Asbel gets a bit cross with him? But
Asbel and Hubert's dad is a real piece of work.
Yeah, he's either extremely absent, or when he stops being as absent, he just ruins their lives.
As this is Wes's joke, so I'm just going to steal it. His name should have been Richard. I'll leave it at that.
Real Richard. I found a few things different this time around playing as an older person with new eyes. One of them was that I found Cheria a bit more interesting because the amount of hurt she feels from having just been completely abandoned like that, I don't know, it resonated a bit more. It made me think as an adult, while she still isn't like the most interesting thing walking around, there is like some purpose to that attitude that she gives to Asbel. But the other big thing that I found is like, man, why? I know why, but why the heck did their dad adopt Hubert off? Like, how messed up of a thing to do is that? And they're given reasons which I don't think anyone's hit yet, so maybe we'll bring that up in the next episode. But they do not seem sufficient to completely break his family. It is arguably a more traumatizing move and did more to push Asbel into the knighthood than Sophie's death ever could, It's really what tears their family apart. And his reasons for doing it are just kind of nonsense.
Yeah, and that's why it's something I'm sort of debating with myself whether or not to talk about it later or now, and that's part of the reason why I was not keen on the absolute character shift here, because it feels as if we are the reasons they're given, as you say, whereas they're not really sufficient. It feels like we're supposed to think that they are, and that the lesson we're being taught is obey authority no matter what, and that's the right thing to do, even if it looks terrible, and you'll suffer the consequences if you don't, which is not something that gels with me that well, and I think that's why the 180 didn't really it is a bone of contention for me anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't always feel earned, and the character behaviors that lead to that don't always line up for me. That their dad ends up being like, as much as they try to humanize him in later points of the story, he still seems up like kind of mustache twirling almost,
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys said, and it's I think that the beginning portions of this part of the narrative also like move a little quickly too. You know what I mean? Like it's like they all come back together very quickly, and then you see all the dynamics sort of like rubbing up against each other like immediately. You know what I mean? And like they're all so different that I think it's a little bit weird. But one thing I forgot to mention is that during this sequence, and I can't remember exactly where she shows back up, but Sophie shows back up, and she's like sort of this like ray of light of someone who hasn't really changed, even though they don't know it's Sophie. But obviously, if you've played the game, if you've ever, I don't know, watched a movie before, you know that Sophie is just Sophie. It's just the return of Sophie. And I think that sort of her mimicking those different dynamics, you talked about this earlier, is really interesting, especially as Asbel, is sort of progressively getting worse here.
I think it's really interesting in the age dynamics as well, because obviously they've all gotten older and she's stayed the same, and how she deals with that sets up one of the most interesting narrative aspects of the game, I think, and how she deals with it, how they deal with that, how their relationships have changed. Early earlier on, everyone was kind of maybe there was something about Sophie and Cheria was a bit jealous and all that kind of thing, and now that's just all been flipped on its head completely. And I really like that, and I like the way they continue to explore that throughout the rest of the game as well.
Yeah, it does make me struggle a little bit with the dichotomy between the childhood arc and the teen arc. Like those turnabouts of personality are so strong, and I agree with you, Paul, that like they're acting like this is earned, but it's hard to feel like it has because there's like nothing in those 7 years intervening, and they don't do a lot to explain some of those changes. Sometimes they're just, well, isn't it self-evident that this is how they would turn out? And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It doesn't change the fact that it feels like you're dealing with almost a completely different cast than you were for the first 3-4 hours of the game. And again, maybe that would have been better served if that first part were a little bit shorter, so you didn't get attached to those personalities at all before they go and like flip the script.
Asbel only knew Richard and Sophie for like generously maybe 2 or 3 days in that childhood
Exactly.
arc. And now there's a 7-year time skip with Asbel not visiting his hometown or sending a letter or doing anything at all, and then suddenly Richard and Sophie are the two most important people in his life again when he can reunite with them. Like he has more romantic chemistry with Richard than he does with Cheria, and I feel very bad for
It's
I feel
not
very
even close.
I feel
Yeah.
very bad for Cheria for being the ungrateful role that she's in. But it all just feels like a wild swing for so many characters to be defined by these people that they barely knew and just communicating so poorly. Like I mean, Asbel's dad is awful. We're all agreed on that. But I think that Asbel's relationships with Hubert and Cheria could have been much improved with one letter or visit in those intervening 7 years. But I mean, basically, I think this cast is not unlikable. Like I think I really like Sophie and Pascal, even though they do exist within certain anime or RPG tropes. But I feel like that this game would be the dialogue would be better or the character relationships would be more fair if there was just some better communicating. But that's I
Yes.
mean, but that's just me, being perpetually always a little annoyed with Asbel.
No, that really hits the mark, and it sort of takes you back to the childhood arc. Actually, conversely, it almost in that aspect it's almost too short. With particularly in regards to Asbel and Sophie, he meets her. It's supposed to be, I guess it's supposed to be days or something. I'm not sure, because suddenly he's like, no, she's gonna live with me forever. I don't care. And yeah, that does seem like a bit of an overreaction to something you just picked up in a meadow a few hours ago.
Even a short little like several months time skip in the middle of the childhood arc could have helped that along a little bit, because it really does the mental load that it puts on me to believe that like Richard and Asbel pick up as if they're the best friends they have ever had after spending 2 days together. And him being so shocked by this betrayal, and it's like, dude, you didn't even know his middle name. No, you're not shocked by how he's acting because you didn't know him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I will say, like with Richard, at least, like I think that they go to some lengths in the childhood arc to show like how different Asbel is with Richard, and so like I think that to some degree, I can see how Richard would see this as being something really significant, at least in his life.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
so
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. But then like the weird part of that is like when you leave to go, because basically you're kicked out of Lawn and you're like, okay, I need to go talk to Richard to figure out, what are we gonna do? And so like you go back through the secret passage, and like while you're on the way, well, I actually think that really what happens is like you're on your way back to Windor to be a knight, and like you hear that Richard is dead. That you're being pursued by people. And then you end up going into the secret passage to go try to find him. And then he's there, wounded. It turns out that his dad was dead, and it seems like he's trying to escape and that his uncle is on the throne. But the weird part of that is like Asbel remembers him very clearly, and the Richard seems to be like kind of and maybe that's because of, obviously Richard is being taken over by some other force. They haven't explained it yet, but that's very clear at this point, that he's being taken over. So that's maybe why he doesn't recognize him as much. But like, if they go to great pains with that, and like the one thing that would have made sense would have been Richard remembering him, and he seems to like only kind of remember him for a minute. So I think that's kind of weird.
And this, what I did like is, as you say, encountering Richard in the passageway, and the way you're led to think that it's really obvious there's something wrong with him, and he's being chased by guards of the city, and you're kind of led to believe, well, maybe he's done something really terrible. He is really evil, and they are rightfully justifiably coming after him to end him. But sort of spinning that on its head and having his uncle is just this power hungry guy, and this, he has been deposed. I like marrying those two things together, not making it so on this one occasion, not making it a simple black and white. Richard's evil. That's why this is happening. So I appreciate
even
that.
when his uncle, when you confront his uncle, it feels a little bit like, did his uncle have a point on something? He seems genuinely distressed by Richard, and you get these moments. It does that weird thing where the main characters all seem a little dumb, because Richard starts like maniacally laughing, hacking into someone, and everyone's just like, huh, Richard's acting a little weird, isn't he?
Yeah, he's like committing like the worst kinds of murder, and Asbel takes a long time. He's maybe like the idea is that Asbel's like sort of off balance that like he can't see it, and he has like this weird attachment to Richard, and like he lets it go for too long. But like it all just happens so fast. Like Richard ends up getting the throne back very quickly after going through two of the most obnoxious dungeons in video games. Like the platform one sucks, and the one that I really hated was it's the base that you go take after you go to the Duke.
Just the same ladders over and over.
And like your assets were so low that like you had to just give me the same 3 screens over and over again. Come on.
Yeah, no, it's basically shaped like a figure 8, but 3 layers on top of each other. And other than what's in the center of the fort, like the courtyard and stuff, they look completely identical. And you have to find 2 switches that the game graciously helps you a little bit with quest markers. But if you're trying to explore the fort and get most of the treasure in it, it is maddening.
I'm gonna say, when you go to take back the castle, that one almost drove me more insane, because it's not quite as bad, even though it does have some like repeated room layouts. Its music is like 3 notes repeated over and over again for the entire time. I ended up having to mute it because well, the soundtrack in a lot of Tales games. Oh, maybe we don't need to tackle that one
No,
today.
it's funny. I was thinking I didn't have anything to say about the music, and so I was listening to it while I was grading before we were podcasting, and I was like, I still don't have anything to say about the music.
I mean,
it's unmemorable
soundtrack. We did a best Tales of Music episode of Rhythm Encounter a few months ago, and Wes, you were on that episode with me, and I don't think it was an accident that there were 0 tracks from Tales of Graces there. This is basic.
Yeah,
and a decent chunk of those were not Sakuraba tracks too.
True, yeah. I brought some Goshina along because I mean I had to. Have you heard that soundtrack? It's Tales of Legendia. But anyway, I don't think this is a memorable soundtrack or dungeon layouts or a lot of other things, but the character relationships are at least interesting enough for me to find them hooks, even though I find some of the premises behind them really annoying, and I don't like Asbel much as a protagonist. But the combat's flashy and fun. The story seeds that they've planted are at least interesting. Have we talked about Pascal yet?
Nope.
Oh no, I wasn't gonna let us stop before we talked about Pascal.
All right,
don't you worry.
All right.
Go ahead.
But like there's enough story seeds and character seeds here that I'm having a good time. I think the combat, like I'm getting into the depth of Tales of Grace's combat for the first time in this playthrough, because again I got to literally the tunnel at the end of the childhood arc when I played this in 2012. But it has gameplay and story and dialogue hooks that I'm enjoying, and I just love playing co-op Tales with a partner, and that's what's keeping me going more than any one shining thing about this RPG. But we should talk about Pascal, because I mean that's another bit of a highlight character. I think my favorite character is Malik, because I like how no nonsense he is, surrounded by all of these emotional teens. But Pascal is probably second. They're the two characters I use the most in battle also.
Yeah, I think I said in my review as well that initially I did find Pascal quite irritating, and as she just appears out of nowhere and then inveigles herself into the party, and yeah,
Her
it's
desire
that
to
kind of
touch Sophie is a little
quirky.
frustrating.
Yeah, that's like, what's going on here? Kind of quirky, kooky character, aren't you? So much fun, and I was like, oh, automatically you are rubbing me up the wrong way.
Yeah,
But
when
that
a
didn't
science
last.
there's a science obsessed character who's so obsessed with learning that they throw social conventions and the notion of like harassment out the window. Again, like it's it's kind of like that one character in Tales of Cold Steel. It's like this is cat uncomfortable situations with a smile kind of thing going on.
Mm.
But I think Pascal's sort of silly enough, but then backs it up with knowledge and mysterious enough that
Oh yeah,
I enjoy Pascal as a character,
Yeah,
even though
I think she's totally charming.
yeah, even though her wanting to touch and possibly dissect Sophie is a little disturbing.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. It wasn't long after that I did start to find it quite charming, even the silly spoinky doinky dialogue and everything like that. Became much more appealing as I progressed through it, and she became a favorite of mine too by the end. Absolutely.
It's just not a Tales game if there's not some complete freaking weirdo who shows up in your party that you fall in love with, even though they are basically a joke character.
Oh my god! I mean, Majilu went from my least favorite to most favorite character over the course
I
of
love
Cheria.
Magilu.
Exactly who I was thinking of.
Yeah. Maybe not every Tales game, but there's enough of them that it's a pattern.
Even like the ones without a really deliberately goofy character, there tends to be someone who's just a weirdo who still ends up being very likable by the end.
But that's part of the appeal of these Tales games. I mean, we know that we're living in character archetypes and anime tropes here, but the dialogue is usually good enough, and the characters' designs and personalities are usually fun enough. When they throw between 5 and 9 of these together, you get an enjoyable RPG experience. And like there's going to be ones I dislike in every game, but if anything, I think I was too harsh on Carol the first time I played Tales of Vesperia.
Yes, come to my side.
Yeah. No, I was too harsh on him before, but then when I played the remaster, it's like, you know what? Carol's not as bad as I remember. But anyway,
I think
these games will always have enough good character interactions and designs and gameplay concepts that they're usually pretty fun, which is why I've played so many of them. It's if anything, like playing this and having such a nice time with it, I'm thinking to myself, like, should I revisit my copy of Tales of Hearts R again? I'm not because that's one I haven't crossed off the list yet.
Oh, the localization makes me sad on that one.
I know I know it's not one of the better ones, but it's one I haven't played yet, and you know the struggle, Wes.
Oh, I absolutely know. And it's one of the strengths of the Tales series is how much character interaction makes a lot of RPG casts feel like a lot of individuals, and you have to feel like those individuals are interesting. Tales casts pull together and make a cohesive unit, actually act close to an ensemble cast situation, and skits are a big, huge part of that.
Yeah.
And it really makes it feel like, okay, even if I don't love all the characters, I love these people as a unit. It's something that like the Persona series also excels at. There are not a lot of RPGs that really pull your party together as some kind of, team or found family or whatever you have, really effectively like the Tales series does.
Yeah, I was going to also mention skits as well, in exactly the same kind of a way. And there's the team building aspect of it, and the slice of life kind of aspect of it that you don't get in the bombastic part of the narrative. You mentioned Persona. I was thinking Trails as well. The long periods of time just spent in character interaction and day-to-day activities and things like that, casual conversations. And Sort of makes me think back to what Sollosi was thinking about, talking about Sophie copying people in battles, and Sophie's interactions within skits with everyone as well. Similar sort of things, copying people and learning how to be a person with them, and it's extremely important. It's funny that it's such an important part that it sort of fades into the background. So it's taken us a while to get around to it. But yeah, that there's a lot of light, and there's a lot of as you've been talking about. I feel like I've been a bit nitpicky on some things, but yeah, with Tales in general, the brightness of it, the music, which in this case is not particularly memorable, but still it's serving a purpose, it's doing its job. It's not throwing me off or making me think, oh, this is the worst thing ever. All of that sort of comes together to create, as Sollosi was saying, a really enjoyable experience. If it's not reinventing the wheel at every single step, that's okay.
And I think I mentioned these before, but you're absolutely right in that seemingly innocuous character interactions like skits do a lot of work in sort of building the player's rapport with the cast. But another part of that are victory poses, because
Yes, absolutely.
if you use characters a lot together, they will have like little co-op victory poses, and sometimes we'll even do some kind of anime nonsense, or like Power Rangers posing together at the end, and I love it every single time. It's like, and especially growing up with RPGs where those kind of interactions just don't exist. Like in Final Fantasy games, there isn't, at least before 15, there aren't like there isn't banter at the end of battle together. Just there's a lot of dialogue and banter, and sort of side stuff that I think makes you feel closer to these characters.
For sure.
Yeah, it's almost like we're seeing the evolution of that kind of thing, isn't it? Which is, I don't know why it's really important to have this sort of opportunity to go back to a game from an earlier period and see those sort of things being introduced. Absolutely.
I think that's a big service to this game in particular out of the Tales series, because if you listen to a lot of the podcasts at RPG Fan, you'll probably have heard me say about a dozen times that the light bits really make the harsh bits hit harder. You need to see what life is like when it's normal and good in order for it being bad to feel like anything special. And in this game, especially this early in, everyone's so dour and so disconnected. Those little moments of them coming together and just existing together, occasionally being goofy together, doing things that aren't just like, oh my god, everything is so terrible, really makes those low points hit a little bit harder, and really give you a connection to these characters that if you didn't have the skits, if you didn't have the victory poses, you wouldn't have any of that connection. There's not a lot of opportunity to build that in the context of the main storytelling itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for all the weaknesses this game has, once the dynamics start to crystallize towards the end of where we are, and then kind of moving forward, I've played a little bit past this. I think that sort of makes up for a lot of the flaws in the storytelling in this game. And while this, I feel like every Tales of game, it sort of has its own flavor and what it's good at. But you're right, like it's the character interactions that sort of keep it consistent. And I think when they lose that thread, like I think about like the end of Tales of Arise into the DLC, I think one of the weaknesses of that game is that it loses that thread, and that it makes it this other thing. So yeah, I think that it starts to really become about the characters in a way that once the cast is all together, I think it works well. So yeah, I mean we're sort of at the end of where we were going to talk today. So after Richard takes the throne, which we've kind of skipped over a lot of stuff there, but that's okay. He then says that he's going to go to war against Lant, and like Asbel's like, hey, can I like try to not have you do that, even though you're clearly a genocidal maniac at this point. And he lets him go off, and then we'll sort of stop there before we move into the next section. We've talked a lot, and you guys have had some really good things to say about this game that I haven't really considered. I really like the sort of the newer perspective along with the expert perspective. You guys have done a really good job of talking through this. Is there anything else in the first section that you guys wanted to talk about before we move along?
I feel bad for Asbel's mother. She's lost her husband and one of her sons, and felt like she had no agency in any of these decisions. And I think she
And
spends
Hubert is extremely rude to her.
yeah, and I think she spends like the entire rest of the game just locked in her room weeping into a pillow, and I feel bad for her. That's all. More respect
No.
for RPG moms.
And the thing is, I almost can't even blame Hubert, because from his perspective, both of his parents did that to him. There's no perspective from a kid that, oh, my mom doesn't have the agency to stop this from happening. So it's an actual complex family situation that doesn't have a clear answer. But yeah, she was stuck between a rock and a hard place.
The only thing that I would come back to initially would be how, as we've spoken about, there not being that many locations to start with. I think at the same time they still manage in this first half to give a little bit of a sense of expansiveness, with a bit of travel here and there, and it builds a kind of sense of a cohesive world anyway. Even if it's one that's of a smaller scope than we might be used to in many games from more recent iterations. But yeah, I think the world building, it's Tales world building, I suppose, and pretty not we're not recreating anything in particular, but yeah, I thought it definitely gave a good sense of the world that we're inhabiting to start with.
Yeah, I mean, I think I ragged on the asset reuse, which they, especially with dungeons, is where it becomes an issue. But I think, given the fact that it was developed for the Wii, right? So they do a good job of sort of giving you the sense that, like, there is a place over there, that you're going to go to eventually, and sort of you have a sense of the world before you go to these spaces, and they hold them for a while in a way that I think, like, once you end up, we're going into the next section here, but once you end up getting to go to Strata, or Fendel or whatever, like, these are places you feel like enough about that you're kind of excited to go there. Which, speaking of that, we will talk about Strata and Fendel next time, as we dig into the second half of Tales of Grace's F, which is actually going to be in 2 weeks. We will have an episode on Tales of Grace's F. But let's talk a little bit about what's coming up after that as well. I know I've said on the last episode that we're going to have a BioWare draft that'll be in, I think it's 6 weeks from now. But before that, we're also going to have an episode on games that define our tastes. If you've ever seen those social media trends, like, what are 4 games that, like, sort of define your taste? We have a feature at RPG Fan that's sort of been sitting there for a while that we're going to publish. And then we're also going to have some people that are going to come on and talk about the games that have, sort of shaped who they are as RPG players and also as gamers in general. And I'm excited to have that conversation.
My list is just Devil May Cry 5 4 times.
If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us, retro@rpgfan.com. You can also get in touch with us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, The Bad Place, Blue Sky, Twitch, YouTube. We're usually RPG Fan or RPG Fan.com and all those spots. You can also join our Discord and have conversations with us there. We also have 2 shops. One is hosted by TeePublic, where you can buy mugs, shirts, things like that. If you want to rep RPG Fan, you can get stuff that way. We also published a book through Hyperplay RPG. You can also go to purchase purchase that book, which is a collection of 300 review cards that you might have seen on Instagram. It's sort of like an old video game magazine. And we also have 2 other podcasts, both are on Mondays. Usually, one is Random Encounter, which is about random things, usually the games that we're playing now, sometimes some thematic events or things that are consistent. I know that we just recently had a Random Encounter about Canadian games and Canadian developers, which is really good. And then the other Monday, we have Rhythm Encounter, which is about RPG music. If you want to review us, you can review us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify. Basically, if you can find podcasts there, we're probably there, and we love feedback. And before we sign off, let's let you know how to get in touch with the different panelists, starting with you, Wes.
You can find me on Blue Sky at Lone Weasel, and that's about it.
Okay. And Paul.
Yeah, I'm the same, really. Blue Sky, just my name, Paul Skevington, and that's it.
And Sollosi.
You can find me on Blue Sky, Instagram, or RPG Fans Discord. On all 3 places, I am at Evoker for Dogs.
And if you want to get in touch with me, you can chat with me on Discord. I'm Zach W. there. You can also obviously email me, retro@rpgfan.com. Either way is a good way to get in touch with me. So thanks so much, the three of you, for coming on. I thought it was a really good conversation. You guys had a lot of really interesting things to say contextually, but also within the game. Maybe think about some things that I hadn't thought about before. And I will chat with you guys again in a couple weeks, and I look forward to it. And also thank you, listeners. Good night and good luck.